so few people, we should thank you. So, there are nearly 1 billion children online, and 170,000 come online every day. And the internet was not really imagined as a place where childhood would happen. So when there was, and Tim is here amongst us today, but when the founders had their utopian view of what good looked like, it was that all users would be equal. And the problem with that idea is that if all users are considered equal, then a child is treated as if they were an adult. And that is the fundamental reason that we have to have another think about the internet in relation to children. And rather than see them as victims of some extreme action, actually think more profoundly about whether it meets their needs. Because I would say there is a correlation between actually upholding their rights and actually them having a safe and secure and time online. So specifically, what I wanted to say is we all know as members of, as people who've been children or who have children or relate to children in different ways, that a child of 4, of 7, of 12, of 17 have very different needs. So for example, if you're 3 to 5, yeah, you just beginning to understand that people see the world differently from you, but you have not one critical way of understanding information and sorting that out critically. So you take what you're told as verbatim. It's not until a child is 13 or 15 that they even understand the concept of risk. And even at that point, some run towards it, some run away from it. But this is my point, is we have to imagine that all of these kids, in all of their varying needs, are all using the technology designed for adults. So, the reason that we have made arrangements for children, and there is a global consensus about this in the offline world, is because they have these specific development needs, because they need specific privileges, because they need the handrails of life. And there is only one environment now that childhood plays out in which this is not operating, and that is the digital. So, this vast demographic, this 1 in 3 users who are being treated in an age-inappropriate way now need us to flip the dial. And sorry, I'm looking at the boss over here. So really, I'm just going to say a few things. So we have to first of all recognize they're there. Yeah, we have to understand that a child is someone under the age of 18. We have to apply their rights. And if you think about it, if you think about it this way, yeah, if you took an impact assessment on any digital service that you can imagine and say, how does it affect their well-being? How is it affecting their autonomy? How is it affecting their health? How is it affecting their sleep? And you start to have a series of practical answers of how you could redesign the digital world in a way that would be for their benefit. And I'm actually going to finish by saying 3 things. First of all, the normal response to this is we should teach children to adapt to the digital world. This will build resilience. Now, I am all for education, and I work very closely with a lot of children, but you cannot ask 1 billion children to adapt to a system that is not designed for them. You must adapt the system for their best interest. Secondly, it is not a binary between access and the system we have now. We have to design a system that is suitable. And lastly, this is not necessarily about age verification, and it's not about content only. It's about the nudges and about the economic exploitation. It's about their data. It's about their digital identity. And I think that you have to look at this in the round. So.
Thank you very much for that. So Bertrand, when we talk about adapting systems, we oftentimes have national legislation versus transnational communication in these systems. How would you add to that?
Good afternoon. My name is Bertrand Lachapelle. I'm the Executive Director of the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network. It's a very compact format, and the question that you ask is something that I could probably elaborate for about an hour and a half. So I will spare you the time, and I want to focus on one key dimension, which is that, as it is particularly appropriate to say in the IGF, there is no alternative to coordination between the different actors to address the challenges that we're facing. And this is extremely important because we're moving from a period of what could be called techno-euphoria, where everything was going to be marvelous because of technology, to a period of techno-doom, where we think that everything is going to be bad because of technology. Both are excessive, and the reality is that human nature has not changed. The problem is that as we grew more aware of the abuses, and there are abuses that have to be addressed, we are developing a flurry of initiatives with all the best intentions by public authorities, by private actors, by civil society. And those initiatives, in spite of their good intentions, are mostly uncoordinated. They are adopted on a reflexive manner, they're reactive, they're quick fix, they are a little bit patchwork, and I would say makeshift. And this sort of, I would say, to use a French word, this sort of governance bricolage cannot be sustainable. Because fundamentally, the lack of coordination is making the problems harder to solve. It increases the number of conflict of laws, and we're in a situation where there's basically a sort of legal arms race that is threatening the very benefits of the internet itself. And so, we are focusing on the symptoms, the abuses, the fact that we have difficulties addressing those issues. But the deeper cause of the problem is that we do not have the instruments, we do not have the tools, we don't have the spaces for all the different stakeholders to be around the same table and address the challenges that they're confronted with. And so, the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network, in a report that we're releasing this week, has highlighted, the Global Status Report, the enormous amount of initiatives that are taking place around the world, in the legislative environment, in the private sector activities. But it is also recording, and that was a very strong message, that was sent by the third global conference that we had in Berlin in June, in partnership with the German government, that sent a very, very strong message of the need for legal interoperability. The only way to reconcile the need for the different actors to have the autonomy of their decision-making, and at the same time, the compatibility and the coexistence between the public authorities around the world and the private actors is to think in terms of legal interoperability and taking inspiration from the way the internet itself was developed. This is about the exercise of sovereignty in the digital age. Sovereignty is still relevant. However, it needs to be exercised in a different manner because in many cases, we need to have extraterritorial exercise of national sovereignty. And the territorially based national jurisdictions are struggling when we're trying to organize the coexistence of billions of people in shared online spaces. So the core message is we need to build the mechanisms that allow all the different actors to address their problems in common, and there's no alternative to coordination among those actors to improve legal interoperability. I think that's the one message that I would like to share today.
Thank you very much. And we have an expert for building cyber capacity in Indo-Pacific with us, Ambassador Feakin, and maybe he can add on how they tried currently building up coordination in the Indo-Pacific area.
Sure, thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. I mean, I think one of the things that we see in the Indo-Pacific, and one of the things that we believe as the Australian government, is that for a start, we're only as strong as our weakest link, so it's important for our own interests of our population, of our national interests, that we build capacity of others in our region. But what we see is a patchwork quilt in the Indo-Pacific of different capability levels, of different ability to be able to respond to the threat environment. Whoever the threat actor might be, wherever that threat comes from, we work with a whole range of different governments who might be struggling with policy approaches to these particular issues, might be struggling with practical approaches. If I just think about the kinds of work that we do in terms of building capacity to combat cybercrime, whatever particular crime that might be, however it's being perpetrated in the online environment, we work with a whole range of governments to look firstly at what kind of legislation exists to be able to combat these crimes. How can we assist in building better legislative approaches within a country? Then how can you work with legal fraternity in order that they understand the legislation and are able to prosecute against that legislation? But also you need to work with the police forces in the region who often don't have great forensics capability in order that they can bring digital forensics into a court case in a submissible form. And then also working with the judiciary itself in order that judges understand the severity of the crime in which they're actually prosecuting against. And then, as we've just spoken about earlier in the panel, how do you then begin to link all of those pieces up at the international level? Certainly something that we talk about a lot as Australia is the Budapest Convention, the cybercrime legislation that links a whole range of different countries in the world in order that we can essentially access evidence far more quickly in order that we can gain evidence to put into a court system in an admissible form. And it's one of the few mechanisms we actually have for cooperation. Unfortunately, it does tend to get caught up in the whole kind of geopolitical discussion, which is a real shame because it's actually a really effective mechanism for coordinating. It's not easy. Even as Australia, we went through an awful lot of shifts and difficulties in our own interdepartmental structures in order that we could introduce the Budapest Cybercrime Convention in 2013, but a really important mechanism. But then more broadly, we need to be working with civil society, ensuring that level of awareness of threats, again, wherever they might be, so that individuals can make the most of the opportunity that is out there. And that really requires that we're not just working as governments, talking about what governments are interested in, because I think most members of the public tend to switch off when it's a government talking to them. So we work really hard in building partnerships with various NGOs, with private sector entities, with academia, in order that we can reach parts of society that otherwise perhaps wouldn't listen to us, in order that we can build that societal resilience to the kinds of threats that they will encounter. And let's not forget, the most vulnerable online users are not just children, but first-time users of these online platforms. And in our region, we still have a huge development journey of connectivity to cycle through, and that means an enormous uplift in awareness and training that we're trying to provide a part of the jigsaw puzzle to, but it's a massive responsibility, I think, on all of us, especially as we see so many new online users, unfortunately, being exploited in various ways.
So, Marie-Laure, you work a lot with children and children's safety and kind of basically to get rid of exploitation and child exploitation. So how can we guarantee safety for children and also first-time internet users in this interconnected world?
Thank you. Yes, I work for an organization called ECPA International. We are a network of NGOs, more than 100 organizations in all regions, and our secretariat is based in Bangkok, Thailand, the Global Secretariat. So as you said, I will focus on the safety and the resiliency and how to build the resiliency of children. The first thing I would like to say is that children have the right to be protected. And what is the main practical implication of this is that companies and all actors involved are not doing a favor to children when they are adopting measures and standards to protect children. This is their legal obligation because children are subject of rights. This is one aspect I would like to raise. The other one is that under the broader framework of human rights, there is a tension between sometimes between the right of children to be protected and the privacy of internet users. And some people, some sectors want to make it an either-or debate. And I strongly believe that it doesn't have to be that way, that we can adopt a technical and non-technical measures to reconcile both. And I also do believe that protecting or ensuring the privacy of internet users shouldn't come at the cost of a weaker protection of children. This is very important. And when we discuss the resiliency and how to strengthen the resiliency of children online, I think there are two aspects, and the first one is that we have to distinguish between the type of risks. There are some risks that are triggered by the behavior of the users, in that case by children, and the debate around this question for me is more about human behavior than technology, because we're discussing here about children who are perhaps solicited 10 times a week to send a pic, a sexualized pic. I just heard that from someone in Stockholm who did a research with teenagers in schools. That's the average number of time children, adolescents were required to send a pic by peers. So we're discussing here, how can we work with the children or the teenagers so that they can resist the peer pressure? It's not so much about technology, it's about trust, their circle of trust. How can they learn to go and talk to someone from their circle of trusts? But there are also the risks that are triggered by companies, content providers, social media, who do not set up the proper standards. And whereas it should be their responsibilities, and we have to look at ways how to do that, how to enforce that on those companies. And I believe Jutta is going to touch upon this topic, so I won't detail on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So if we are talking about the right to be protected and kind of the societal approach to it, can you add something what Poland is doing in this area, Minister Zagorski?
Good afternoon, thank you very much. In Poland, we are trying to talk about the trees as a challenge, because you are talking about this whole problems which we mentioned here. We must look for allies who will help us to meet these challenges, depending on the area, because it must be emphasized that it's necessary to act simultaneously on many fronts. We will have different partners, business, public administration, NGOs, but also individual citizens in the role of students, parents, pupils, teachers, as well as consumers, portal users. Only systematic cooperation with them will allow us to achieve the basic goal, which is network and user security. Talking about the areas where this cooperation is required is primarily the security of the network itself. It's the first goal for us, and now very important in the context of 5G. In Poland, we talk a lot about this because infrastructure is the crucial element of the system. Security of mobile networks is becoming crucial, if only because the use of mobile internet is becoming more common. We are talking about children, about teenagers. In Poland, for 80% of teenagers, a smartphone is the basic, if not only channel to access the network. So if we are talking about the safety of children, we must also talking about the safety of the mobile network. And new issues are constantly emerging, such as the security and rights of social media users, for example, also in the context of children. But in general, we should discuss about who we are as a social media consumers, or maybe only member of the community, and what are our rights. This discussion is also very important. And as a public administration, we are not able to make full use of the opportunities offered by the digital revolution. So from this reason, mutual trust is so important. one thing I would like to say from the Polish perspective. One example, since September 2018 to August 2019, which is 12 months after Polish cybersecurity law was introduced, only one of our 3 searches at national level received almost 22,000 reports of potential incidents. It is 30% more than a year earlier. So what does it show to us? That's proof 2 things. There are, of course, more cyber threats, cyber crimes, and I believe there are no more people being aware. Being aware of the nature of types of cyber threats and being aware about how to report these incidents. It's also very important if you are talking about the safety, because if you are talking about alliance, about cooperation, we need a cooperation also from the business and from the citizens. The increasing awareness did not came from nowhere. It's a result of activities taken by the public and private entities in recent years. Activities taken separately by public administration, businesses, or NGOs, and activities resulted from close collaboration of public-private. And last thing, but very crucial in the context of the aerial statements. As I mentioned, there's a lot of areas where we need strong cooperation, but one of them is especially important. This is the safety of our children. So when we are talking about threats, crucial, which could affect children. And from this reason, one of the initiatives of my ministry in Poland, on which we put a lot of emphasis, is to protect children and use against dangerous content available. So last month, we signed the declaration of cooperation to ensure the safety of children and use on the internet. It's an example of a wide range of initiatives which are taken by many players in Poland. So it's very important for us, concluding, we need mutual trust, sharing information and knowledge, cooperation, the private sector and cybersecurity. And last but not least, we're talking about the legislation, the good legislation, which gives enough protection of consumers and enough space for business to grow up is also very important.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ko. Welcome to the panel. How do you assure cooperation between the private sector and the administration and building up cybersecurity capacity in Singapore?
Thank you very much. I'm David Ko, the head of Commissioner for Cybersecurity from the Republic of Singapore. What we're trying to do is we are actually trying to build a digital society. My country has an aspiration to have a smart nation. Singapore is a tiny country, so it's a smart city. My country is a city, so smart nation is a smart city on steroids, if you like. So we have framed it as an issue of digital readiness. We want our people to be able to reap the full benefits, the opportunities that the digital economy gives them. So what is digital readiness? It's things like digital access, digital literacy, digital participation, and digital security. Digital readiness is more than just access. It's about equipping the people with the skills and the know-how of how to use technology. We are not digital natives. My children are digital natives. We are emigres. I still speak digital with a bit of an accent. Now, the Singapore government has introduced various digital literacy initiatives to enable Singaporeans to have the skills, the confidence, and the motivation to use technology, beyond just being able to operate mobile devices or computers. We need to nurture a digital society which includes ensuring that no one is left behind, especially vulnerable groups. And this I would include children, people with disabilities, seniors, and low-income families. Singapore, you might think, is a rich country, but we have people who are low income, they have less access. So how do you ensure that they're not left behind? So digital inclusion is an important priority in my country. It also means access, which means that it has to be affordable. So again, issue of affordability comes in, and also language. Not everyone in Singapore speaks English. A lot of the older generation did not have the benefit of education. So there is a big challenge in terms of having appropriate access in the vernacular in languages like Malay, Tamil, or Chinese. Big challenge for government when we're trying to put out applications. You know, it's difficult enough trying to have it usable in English, but you have to have it in 4 different languages. So these are real challenges. It also means security. And by this, we talk about things like cyberbullying for children. This is a big issue for the younger generation. Also cybersecurity and cybercrime, and also digital literacy, being able to tell truth from fiction. How are we doing this? We're doing it through a multi-stakeholder approach. We call it a 3P approach. So it's the public sector, the private sector, and the people sector. And we try to do this as an inclusive manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So it's a lot of building up digital readiness and citizen education. But Jutta, is it not only the user's responsibility? Is it just maybe more than just the user who has to add to this?
Of course, I do think, although my organization, which is the Digital Opportunities Foundation in Germany, where I'm chairwoman of the board, has always the user in the focus, but we follow a more human rights-based approach. And I really appreciated hearing Minister Altmaier this morning saying that the internet, access to the internet is a human right, should be a human right in some parts of the world, but it should be everywhere. But we also see that there is a right to protection. Of course, we need user education, we need digital literacy, and I really like hearing and like seeing, especially at the Internet Governance Forum, how many initiatives are going on in the various countries. I liked really what I heard from the government representatives here on the panel. We need users that are competent, that have the relevant skills to make use, to benefit from the internet, from digitization. But we also need to say that states have obligations and companies have responsibilities towards their users. There is something called the duty of care, and of course we need care of those most vulnerable groups, but we need care of all users, I would say. So when it comes to this duty of care, that means that the services need to be designed that they serve the users, that the users can benefit from what is offered to them. And I don't think it must be in conflict with, of course, companies have also a duty to make money. That's their purpose, and to commercialize their services, but still with the user in the focus, and especially with young users in the focus. We often see that services are designed for young users, but we more often see that young users make use of services that are not designed for them. So, and I do see there a duty of care also for these users. And it's not, you're absolutely right, David, it's not only young users. We have less experienced users still in all parts of the world. We cannot address this only with education. We need education, but we need a joint responsibility, I would say. Coming to the end, I would like also to quote on the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, where it's explicitly mentioned that there is a right to access to the media. That was 30 years ago. People were thinking about mass media like press and like broadcasting, but today that is the internet. So there is a right to have access. There is a right to have access to information, the right to freedom of expression. So when this is all formulated very well, but not addressing like the digital world that we have today. And that's now a bit of advertising that we will have a session with regard exactly to the UN Convention on the Right of the Child in the big Salle Europe, where we've been in this morning, where we will discuss a general comment to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And there we will also have the voices of the youth. We will have young people there so that we can discuss a bit further how they exercise their right to be heard also in the digital world. Thank you.
Teams, my apologies. Can I be a little bit disruptive here and expand for 1 minute on what Jutta just said? Thank you. So about the duty of care of companies, and one important aspect in my experience, I've seen that there is a huge divide between private sector, tech company, service providers, social media platforms that are based in the Western world and the rest of the world, Africa, Asia, Latin America. And perhaps this is linked to different, factors. One of it could be that mandatory reporting is not happening in many countries outside of the Western world. Also, sometimes there is a lack of understanding of how automatic tools or solutions that are available, how they basically work. And I've heard one ISP person telling me in a country in Southeast Asia that using photo DNA would be violating the privacy of their users, which for those of you who know how photo DNA works, it's simply not true. It's an automated system. It doesn't look into content. No human does that. And sometimes it's also a mindset, and it's just ignoring that they have an obligation, and they don't want to acknowledge that illegal content go through their platforms or are sitting on their platforms. So I think we shouldn't think of Western mindset all the time. We should look at this issue from a more of a global perspective. Thank you.
So what we heard in this panel was, or even earlier this morning, that access to the internet could be or should be a human right, but still there is the right to protection, especially for the most vulnerable people out there, especially children. So how can we build a legal framework which is as connected as the internet is and not just national legislation? So it has an aspect of education for sure, but at the other hand, we have kind of a duty of care by the large platforms out there, and we have to understand it as a joint responsibility. And we have to develop a global responsibility out of it, and for this we have to develop a kind of common understanding, looking at the different approaches on privacy, on security. Closing with that, we have a little time left for question, and I would like to open. So are there any questions from the audience? There's one question. Perfect.
Hello, everybody. From Mexico, Mauricio Hernandez. My question is, I've heard about the responsibility of platforms, responsibility of users, and the human rights about the right to be protected as well as the right to access to internet. However, how on this, in all these relations are based the responsibility of the states, not only in creating the correct legislation, but also to include this aspect within the education systems. Thank you.
Can I?
Piben?
Sorry. I actually think that there's a couple of different answers to that. And one of the things that has slightly frustrated me, including amongst myself, is we haven't talked about liability. We've let this question of safety and security go for about 30 minutes without saying that we have a global system where the platforms do not accept liability for what goes on. And I think until we tackle that as an international community, we will never be safe, users of all kinds. So I just want to put that out there. Also, I did not introduce myself, but amongst other things, I am a member of the House of Lords, and we have brought in various pieces of legislation because this is something that we're looking at very carefully, specifically data protection laws, and building on that, because there is the engine room. I think rights laws, as has been described very well by Jutta, is a really important thing. But more fundamentally is I think we have to stop thinking about this as an exceptional space and be prepared to apply and enforce the laws we have, whether they're health and safety, whether they're consumer, whether they're business laws. And I want to finish with this, which is if I put up a video of a children's birthday party and it's playing Prince in the background, I get a takedown notice very quickly because of the IP laws. Those are being properly enforced. But in your world, we're not getting it taken down quickly enough. So I think you have to look at where the power is, where the business power is, and where the accountability is, and therein lies the answer for us all.
Bertrand, can you add to it from a transnational?
I'd like to help all of us make a sort of mental shift that it is extremely easy to always say that it is somebody else's responsibility to do something. I know that's not what you're saying, but we are in a natural environment where basically the governments are saying companies are not doing what they should be doing. And then the companies say, you're asking us to do things that are disproportionate and inappropriate. And usually civil society says, I don't like when you guys are behind closed doors making deals. The challenge and the preliminary thing is to get the actors around the table so that they formulate the problems as a problem they have in common and not that as a problem they have with each other. This is a thing that we always skip. We get into a competition of my solution is better than yours. Or I want to establish my solution because in a standards competition, if you are the first one to establish your standard, you will prevail and it will be a power struggle. This is exactly the legal arms race I was describing, and we need to get together to be able to formulate the problems in common before we begin to discuss the solutions. And for anybody who is interested, my advertisement is you come on Wednesday at 1:15 in the Europazal, where you will get more information about the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network.
I think I just wanted to pick up on the really good point made there about the kind of reinvention of the wheel. And you see it at all different levels in terms of how we look at the internet, how it's governed, how states operate in the online environment, and how individuals do and businesses do. And I think often you hear this argument of, well, this is a new environment, therefore we need to recreate everything and have brand new legal practice in the online environment. And that's actually the worst thing we could do. Because as soon as you do that, you say that hundreds and hundreds of years of legal process and building up norms in the physical space, suddenly they'll be lost. And there is a very big group, if you like, of voices that are building in terms of at the state level that we should essentially reinvent international law in cyberspace. And that's a very dangerous precedent to begin to set. And so what we need to do is understand that, yes, the internet is a very different place to that it was when it was formed, all those years ago. So now it's about, well, how do we begin looking at how the law is applied online and how at times we have to enforce that? And I wouldn't disagree, a lot of that has got to be done with other voices in the room that may have not been in the room before, but that is vital if we're to make this work.
I'm sure we could discuss about this specific topic for an hour or so, but we do not have much time left. Is there one short question from the audience? Yeah, back there.
Hello, my name is Isabella. I'm from Brazil, from an NGO which has the mission is honor children. And I'd like to hear from you if you believe the use of data from children for a commercial purpose as advertisement aimed to children is acceptable, or it is a commercial exploration of them.
Jutta?
Yeah, so I grabbed the mic because I need to say, of course, I don't think that is acceptable. We need to differentiate their at age, of course. It makes a difference if it's the data of a 16 or 17-year-old who might know what he or she has done when giving away that data, or the data of a 3 or 4-year-old. But nonetheless, I would say profiling of children should be forbidden for commercialization. And there could be, like we had that example from Sonja Jost in the last panel, that you already make use of the data, but it's anonymized so that you don't track down the individual person where the data comes from. I'm still a bit concerned about using data of children to set up even anonymous profiles just to adjust your products so that they are more likable by children. We will have another panel how this is done based on a business model for games, for example. We'll discuss that tomorrow morning at 9:30. So there will be lots of debates about that. But to be honest, I really think don't use data of children for commercial purpose.
Marilo.
Yes, and this question is also particularly relevant in the context of the Internet of Things debate, where toys are increasingly being connected to the Internet, and companies are collecting data, sometimes not even encrypted, and we don't really know what will happen and what is happening with the data. With Jutta, 2 or 3 years ago, we organized a session at the Internet Governance Forum in Mexico where we discussed those topics, and it's still relevant, unfortunately, because I don't think much progress has been made. Thank you.
Just to say, I introduced a data protection law for under 18s in the UK, which will become UK law in January. And we took a slightly nuanced position about it, but we definitely said no targeted advertising, no profiling of children to deliver them things that are detrimental to them. And it had a very high bar of privacy within that law, and no sharing for commercial purposes, and particularly on a safety front, to have the GPS switched off, so you couldn't share the real-time location of a child unless it for commercial purposes. So you could for safeguarding, etc. So we took a very nuanced thing. I suggest you look at the ICO website for what they have to say about it, because that's the UK regulator. But absolutely, children's data should have a higher bar of governance than all other data. Absolutely.
And last few words, I was talking about the awareness. Awareness is crucial. Awareness of parents, awareness of business, of course, awareness of teachers. So this is key element if you are talking about the campaign, about the law. But the best law is nothing if we have no enough awareness about the cyber threats, especially in the context of children.
Can I just jump in and say that I just want to build on Toby's earlier point, that there's no need to reinvent the wheel. It's not that this is a new area and then we have to start from scratch. We have existing laws in the governments, in our respective jurisdictions, to safeguard children, safeguard vulnerable people. We should not see the internet as an area where our laws don't apply. I think this is the challenge. We had the idea that it was a utopia where great and wonderful things can happen. It is true, there's great access to uplift people, to gain access to knowledge, etc. But it also has opportunity to all kinds of criminals, all kinds of malicious activity, and we need to safeguard them.
I would like to close the session now. Thank you to all of you for taking part and adding to the discussion. And I think we have a lot of food for thought to bring in for the next coming day for the IGF. So enjoy the forum. Thank you.
Yes? No? Volume? Yes? Okay. Hello and welcome. Hi. That's okay. Yes, it's okay. First, I apologize for getting started a bit late. I know this was supposed to start about 1 o'clock, but it looked like a fascinating conversation happening, so we wanted to make sure that could be completed. Also, as you may have noticed, in all of the schedules except for the live mobile version of the schedule, the information is correct. We are presenting today, or I am presenting today, on the next 50 years of digital life, which is a Pew Internet Research collaboration. I am not presenting on mobile connectivity. So if anyone needs to leave, I do understand that. I know there was some confusion. I apologize for that. I'm not sure how part of the schedule was mispresented. For the last 20 years, Elon University's Imagining the Internet Center and Pew Research have partnered to address questions related to what do we believe the future of the internet will look like. This has been presented through multiple ways, which I think the video on this slide probably gives the best overview of what has been happening over the last 2 decades for this project, looking at what do we believe the future of the internet can, will, or should be.
Imagine how the internet is revolutionizing everything.
Sum total of human knowledge can now be accessible by everyone.
Imagine the future unfolding at a pace faster than we can comprehend.
We've never in the history of mankind had access to so much information so quickly and so easily.
It rapidly facilitates access to information. It also rapidly facilitates our ability to communicate with other people.
We're living in a world that changes faster than it ever has in the history of our species. You go back 1,000 years and you can go through your life and never see anything new. Right now you see something new every year.
The Imagining the Internet Center at Elon University in North Carolina gathers people's projections, their hopes and fears about the positive and negative impacts of disruptive change.
Imagining the Internet's mission is to explore and provide insights into emerging issues, to inform the public, to serve the greater good. On our website, we've documented experts' expectations, their hopes, and their fears in thousands of videos and hundreds of written research reports and news stories. We've traveled the globe to question the experts, asking them to imagine the future impact of communications evolution. These projects hold a mirror to humans' changing lives in an ever-changing world of interactive information sharing. Imagining the Internet exposes vital issues to better inform our planning for the future, and it provides a historic documentation of a revolutionary time.
Nowadays, we do so much on the internet. We live our lives on the internet. We do so much of our pleasure as well as our work happens on the internet, that my entire view of the world is now governed by the people I speak to and the opinions that I listen to on the internet. So who I can connect to on the internet determines what I think of the world.
Imagining the Internet has many dimensions. The center fields documentary journalism teams that travel the world to provide near real-time reporting at Technology Futures events. Elon University faculty, staff, and alumni have produced hundreds of multimedia stories. These teams have recorded expert debates and discussions at the Global Internet Governance Forums and at World Wide Web and Internet Society conferences. They were on hand to record the induction of the inaugural class of the Internet Hall of Fame.
Influential technology innovators, astute policy experts, and other people from around the world are sharing their foresight regarding crucial issues we need to address. We are documenting their optimistic expectations for great good to emerge, along with their frank statements that some negative, predictable, and unintended consequences of technological advances could lead to a very dark future.
The internet, in my mind, is only reached its teenage years. And that gives you a kind of conditioned to see why it's behaving the way it does, because it's behaving very badly, okay? It's mischievous, it's erratic, it's unruly, and it's disobedient.
Survey research is another important part of imagining the Internet's work. Many books and dozens of research reports have been produced containing thousands of predictions by experts. The findings of this work provide powerful insights. We are beginning to understand the fundamental changes that rapidly evolving communication networks are bringing to societies and to the lives of individuals.
Imagining the Internet is a mirror we hold up to our world to assist all of us in understanding the impact of the technology we are allowing to gradually insinuate itself into our lives to a point at which it seems we cannot thrive without it. We have to examine how we are changing as our tools change. We must work diligently to identify challenges and opportunities in order to make informed choices today, to create the future we want. If we don't, we may fall victim to a tomorrow we never saw coming.
I wish that the Internet could become a kind of historical watershed, the beginning of global connectivity. This will evolve over time. There will be new ways of doing this. Someday the Internet will be replaced by something else, better, I hope. But I hope that that trend simply continues and that we all become a planet of people, not a planet of nations.
So while imagining the Internet itself is a project of Elon University primarily, the reports and the surveys are a collaborative effort that really were developed through the vision of Lee Rainey, Director of Internet and Technology Research at Pew Research Center, and one of my co-authors on the most recent report. And his contributions cannot be overstated, as well as Jana Anderson's contributions to creating an incredible curation of predictions regarding the future of various aspects of Internet technology. If you're interested, the Imagining the Internet website apologies, freely shares the results of surveys that have been completed over the last, I believe our first one was in 2004, looking at asking usually some pretty difficult questions to respondents, asking them to distill incredibly complex topics into single opinions or short sound bites. They ask anyone in the room who has participated in Future of the Internet surveys in the past. Do we have any participants in the room today? Okay. I'm going to ask you to respond to some of the same questions that we asked on our most recent survey, and we'll see if you are able to choose a side or come up with short, pithy responses. It's not an easy ask. The reason that the topic for our most recent report asks people to envision what will the Internet look like, what will society look like, what will that intersection look like in 50 years, is because we're at a historic moment today. This report was released on October 28th, I believe, you might want to fact check me, to coincide with the very first computer-to-computer connection, which happened over ARPANET. Are you fact-checking me at the moment? I appreciate that. This first connection was overseen by Leonard Kleinrock in his lab in, I think it was UCLA to Stanford connection. I can't see my presentation notes while I present, so you'll have to bear with me a bit. This was not that long ago, 50 years. First interconnection, the first communication between two computers. Anybody heard Leonard Kleinrock discuss what was the first message that was sent from one computer to another? Anyone know this bit of Internet history trivia? Low, right. Why low? What was low? Exactly. I love that story. The very first message, and the connection crashed. And that's a true one, actually. Anyone heard the reason that we call it computer bug is because a moth got into a server? Have you heard that story? That one's technically not true. The low story is, though. Today, how many users do we have? How many people access the web worldwide today? Happen to know? I think our most recent measure was from December 2018. We're at about 4.1 billion connections today. 50 years. It's incredible. As I was drafting the early aspects of this report, I took a look at our early 90s predictions database, which you can see if you're interested on the Imagine the Internet website. You can search by various topics, and this was one of the original projects that was produced by the Imagine the Internet Center, where student researchers looked at publications from the early mid-90s to see what were people saying then about the potential or the state of the internet. So in 1994, Vint Cerf, who also, both Leonard Kleinrock and Vint Cerf participated in our most recent survey. So we have their thoughts, which is fascinating. I am so lucky to be able to do this work and to hear from people who were so instrumental to the development of what we have today, and to read their thoughts and think about their responses. But I thought this quote was fascinating. In 1994, Vint Cerf said, "Now we've got this damned airplane in flight, how do we change engines without crashing the thing?" Now at the time, he was referencing the infrastructure of the web, which was not built for 4.1 billion connections, right? But I like this quotation because I like to think today, what is the engine of the internet? Is it the structure? Is it the server farms? In my opinion, it's the people. I believe the people today are the engine powering the internet. And ultimately, when we look to the future, we look to the next 50 years and what the internet is and what it could become, I believe it's going to be the people who use the network that will determine where the internet goes. The question we asked, the overarching question in this survey was, the year 2019 will mark the 50th anniversary, and this survey was distributed in summer 2018, will mark the 50th anniversary of the first host-to-host internet connection. Please think about the next 50 years. Where will the internet and digital life be a half century from now? Simple question, right? Far from it. Oh, I didn't really want to show that one yet, but I'll go there in a second. We also asked people to say, do you believe that overall the internet will lead to positive change, lead to negative change, lead to no significant change? I'd like to get just a temperature of the room. In 50 years, so we're thinking 2069, how many believe that internet use will lead to positive change for humanity? No hands up. One hand, two, a couple. Wonderful. Do you mind if I ask why? Yes.
Okay, I think we are at the point where we are seeing, there is no denying the fact that the overall impact of the internet has been amazing. Just look at the amount of wealth created, right? If you go back 10 years ago, you're talking about the wealthiest company, you'd have oil companies. Right now, oil companies come around number 11, number 12. So there's no doubt that the internet has created value. But we are at a point where some of the contrary consequences that result from the fact that the internet was created and somehow ignore the fact that human beings are greedy, capricious. They're becoming really in our face. And I think that humans, we won't have a choice but to learn from that. It's a phase. We'll learn from that, and it's only going to get better, because even the people who have benefited from it, even if they continue benefiting from some of the negative aspects, they're going to see that long-term, this is not sustainable, so let's fix it. So long-term, I think it's going to be net positive.
I think the point, you said it's a phase, it's a moment. Overall, we heard so many respondents saying, this is a pivotal time. This is a moment where we have big decisions to consider. And whatever the outcome of those decisions are, related to regulation, security, economic dispersion, those are going to have outsized effects on where we will be as a shared global community in 50 years. Excellent, thank you. Anyone else care to share? Why do you believe in 50 years internet use will generally improve humanity? Anyone brave? One more? You know, next up I'm going to ask about negatives, so be thinking. I can tell you the vast majority of respondents, about 72%, said that change would be for the better. Over the course of this presentation, I'll go into why people believed or people stated that change would be for the better, but I can also tell you, because this is primarily a qualitative study, we were looking for longer form answers. The research was done using thematic analysis. It was very difficult for responses to be cut and dry, to say yes, absolutely, overwhelmingly positive. Almost every response was, I believe change will be for the positive, but ... followed by some sort of response regarding how it could potentially be positive or also maybe negative. I ask, how many believe that overall, the effect of the internet will be negative for humanity by 2026? Are you choosing not to raise your hand because you know I'm going to ask why? All right, we will come back to this at the end of the presentation. Would you care to respond? No? We'll come back to this towards the end of the presentation because I'm interested to see what themes may resonate with you and potentially change or affect your thinking regarding where we will be in 50 years. About 3% of our respondents said that there would be no significant change, but having read many of those responses, I can tell you it wasn't so much that there would be no significant change, but many people chose that option, and we had a forced answer, 3 options only, because they said, I can't answer this question. It's going to be both positive and negative. Because truly the meat of our report and the important aspects that I want to share with you are the voices of our participants. The bulk of what I'll be sharing with you today are direct quotes that come from our 50 years of, or predictions for the next 50 years of Internet report. This is published on both Pew, Internet, and American Life website, as well as the Imagine the Internet website, widely available. Please, it's a heavy read. It's about 200 plus pages. We have over 500 people who responded and who are included in the report. So settle in with some coffee tonight, maybe. It's going to take a while, but I will try to cover some of the highlights. But I do strongly recommend, if you have a chance, it's a very interesting read. So the first quote I wanted to share with you is one that really encompassed a lot of what I saw as some of the main points brought up by many respondents, saying, it's been the long-term arc of history to be improving, to be better. There's a potential for nightmares, of course, as well as huge backlashes against change, including violent ones. But for the past 10,000 years, improvement has been the way to bet. And looking at, part of why I like this quote and chose it for the presentation is because so many of our respondents looked backwards to make predictions for the future. They looked at what has happened over the last 50 years of internet development and used that and tried to think about that in a cohesive overall sense to make a statement about what will the next 50 years hold. And I think, like our one brave responder earlier said, if we look at what the internet has accomplished or what access to the internet has allowed us as humans to accomplish today, it can only be better. It can only keep improving for the next 50 years. And that first theme, we're going to start with some overarching themes, and then I'll talk about people who said things will be positive and then people who said things will be negative. So the first theme I want to touch on is humanity's responsibility, saying that digital life will continue to be what people make of it. If we want to have a better future, if internet connectivity is going to be a part of that, if our giant global tech and human network are going to lead to positive change, then we need to make responsible decisions today and every day for that to happen in the future. So changes in digital life are human-driven. Technology cannot be separated from the human component that uses it, that develops it, that creates it. Digital technologies have the capacity to be terrific enablers, but the question remains, enablers of what? Of whose vision? Of what values? And these, it seems to me, are the defining questions. Who makes the decisions? Who creates the web? Do we have the democratic ideal of a fully open and accessible web that we once believed could be the utopian environment of potential future? Anybody think this great experiment has built our online utopia? That was a really, I can look back at previous predictions, and that was a really strongly held belief. We're going to take away power differentials. We're going to take away economic differentials. We are all equal in an online space. There are literally people laughing in the audience. Perhaps that didn't quite come to pass. Once you finish the 200-plus page report, go back and read reports from 20 years ago, because we had some very rosy visions. The next overarching theme was the theme of public policy and regulation, that we're coming potentially to an end of a largely unregulated internet. Elected officials, technology leaders will move ahead with regulatory frameworks aimed at protecting the public good. The lawless alternative has caused dangerous disruptions across society. When I say many respondents said the internet will lead to better things, but often that but was followed by, we need thoughtful regulation. What that might look like was not specified typically. Many mentioned a need for global regulation. It can't be corporate-based, it can't be single location-based, but that we need to understand that regulation is needed at an overarching global level. You see, the definition of what it means to be human will evolve, and laws and regulations will follow, albeit in a less than direct manner. We will value governments in new and different ways, and we will expect more from our technology platforms. The deluge of data will provide new inputs into the decision models for platforms. The quotes for this theme were wide-ranging and often could be fit into several different categories regarding how someone saw regulation as a topic or as a concept. This was pervasive, widespread, internet of everything. If I could say there was one thing that most people agreed on, it was this: that we won't consider the internet as an internet. We won't log on. We used to talk about, and we still sometimes do, having online lives and offline lives, yes? That will be just difficult to fathom because there won't be a sense of accessing the internet. You will be constantly accessing the internet. We're pretty close. Internet use will be nearly as pervasive and necessary as oxygen. Seamless connectivity will be the norm, and it may be impossible to unplug. Yes, a few heads nodding for that one. We are already seeing some of this seamless connectivity. The refrigerators that you open the door and it tells you what you need on your, within your appliance, or the fact that I can take a look and see on my phone app where my car is currently parked. It's in Washington, D.C., but my phone knows that. Okay. We already have ways that we are utilizing the structure of the internet without realizing it. And I think often when we talk about logging on, what we really mean is we're logging into the web, right? Which is different than internet. In future, people will stop referring to the internet and take it for granted, much as the developed world takes electric power for granted. This will take a fair amount of engineering, standards development, and improved operational practices. We also had some very interesting comments in this area on what it means to be unable to disconnect, what that means for economic disparity, what that means for our relationship with the natural world. So just a lot of interesting, very meaty quotes on this idea and topic, but the pervasiveness of connectivity in the internet was dominated many of these quotations and responses. This was my favorite part to write. People who took some liberties with considering what will the world look like in 2026. Some of them writing little mini utopian or dystopian novels, which is fascinating. So from amazing advancements to dystopian developments, experts imagine a wide array of possible scenarios for the world 50 years in the future. Oh, I'm missing one. There, sorry, out of order. Once it was proven in 2045 that a hybrid human networked intelligence could manage and draft legislation far better than inconsistent and infinitely corruptible humans, the US Congress was replaced with a dynamic network model accounting for the concerns of citizens, yet bound by resource constraints and established laws. So this is a chunk from about a 3-page opus on what this contributor believed the future would look like in 2026. I'm sorry, 2069. And it was a humorist. He's a director of digital at The Onion, which is a humorous publication, but also insightful, considering what would it mean if we decide that decisions can be better made by machines than by humans. What was that? I was going to say, you just took my next comment. How close are we to that today? What decisions do we already believe that machines are better at making than humans are? So, our next set of themes will be related to individuals who were looking at hopeful visions of 2026. I don't know why that says 2026. It should be 2069. I'm probably going to say it a million more times, too. And one of the areas where there was very little disagreement was that we as humans will very likely be healthier. We will probably live longer. And that the divide between human and machine will probably diminish, that we'll be essentially a cyborg generation. Internet-enabled technology will help people live longer and healthier lives. Scientific advances will continue to blur the line between human and machine. We are close. We have artificial organs. We have, how many of you have a cell phone on you right now? How many of you are touching your cell phone at this moment or could easily be touching it? Many of you. When I asked this to I'm a professor at Elon University, so when I asked that question to my students, to classes, nearly everyone raises their hand. Because regardless of if you're actually wearing some sort of connected technology, you're probably, particularly among particular ages and geographic locations, have very easy access to whatever technology you might be using to connect to the web. Typically, it's a cell phone. We could be on our way to respeciation with genetics, robotics, and AI combined to make us superhuman. Will the internet allow us to cheat death? How long can we live if we replace everything except our brains? Do we need our brains? This is the fun part where I get to present this stuff. The bulk of the work for this is me sitting alone in my dark office thinking about those sorts of questions while I'm reading these quotes. But I understand that there are many ways that technology will lead to worse lives. However, we have to believe that our successors will opt for ways to improve and extend the human species rather than annihilate it. And we have seen great strides in healthcare. We recently did, it was maybe 2 reports ago, looking at the future of health and healthcare. And overwhelmingly, people believe that networked technologies have enabled us to have improved health on a physical level. We will talk more about that later in the presentation, not potentially necessarily on a mental or emotional level. Another positive theme was the sense of less work and more leisure. And this is intricately tied also with artificial intelligence. So AI tools will take over repetitive, unsafe, and physically taxing labor, leaving humans with more time for leisure. And interestingly, although many framed this in a positive way, many also saw this as potentially negative. Because if we don't have something to work for, if we are able to outsource work to AI applications, how do we have a sense of autonomy and a sense of value as humans? A great number of jobs will be able to be done totally over the internet. This could be from home or from the brain implant, another person who sees us as human cyborg. Robots will do the majority of the physical jobs, often with a remote person overseeing the activity, but largely managed with AI. Many saw the future of work as being isolating. If we're able to do things remotely, is there a need to connect and collaborate? Why are you here in this room instead of participating virtually? It's a real question. Why? Why do you bother to come here? Okay. I've had some of the quotes regarding the downside of no longer working together. I thought they were really, really forward-thinking, very insightful, because truly we do come into contact with others with shared interest and shared ideas, and we work together for some sort of common goal, and often that is through some sort of compensated work. What happens if that is largely outsourced, or if we can do it remotely? And what are we seeing from some of that today? The theme of greater individualized experiences, so not necessarily customized to the user, but that your experience will be individual to you as a user. We see some of this, probably the best way I can describe how this came about was if I open Google and I search for something, my search results will be different than anyone else's in this room. Okay? That's an individualized experience that I have through the algorithms that Google uses to determine what my past behavior says about what I might be looking for or enjoying, or where I physically am and what that means for what I'm searching for. So that is predicted to continue to extend and expand. So advances in AI and robots can inspire us to think deeply about the kind of work we really want to do and how we can change the way we learn, how we might embrace diversity to create myriad new partnerships. The reason I chose this quote for this area is because the concept's a little bit difficult to Do we have any qualitative researchers in the room by any chance? Maybe one, sort of. Qualitative research is not just exactly what people say, but trying to tease out meaning across different areas and how people might be describing something using different words, terminologies. And I thought this was an interesting way to consider that we're able to potentially be self-reflective about who we want to be, what we want to be, and how we might be able to tailor experiences or individualize experiences for who we are as people or individuals. And that often won't be done consciously. In fact, it will largely be done unconsciously. And also some concern here regarding how much do we want to choose who we are and what experiences we want to have, and how much, again, will we outsource to network technologies. Our past behavior tends to inform what our future behavior will be. Those who are like us, their behavior informs what our experience is like online or in a networked space. In some ways that leads to convenience. In some ways it can lead to isolation, not being exposed to new and different ideas, being very uncomfortable leaving your comfort zone. I thought this was another interesting way to consider. The internet will evolve into a pervasive global nervous system. Life will calm down and provide a more balanced physical and digital presence. Customization of interfaces will be better matched to what we desire. This will enable humans and AI devices to participate in a joint exchange far more easily than is the case today. Rockstar, Leonard Kleinrock. Others, many saw one of the greatest benefits of the web over the last 50 years, and one of the future benefits potentially, is the ability to connect and collaborate without geographic restrictions, without time restrictions. So a fully networked world will enhance opportunities for global collaboration, cooperation, and community development, unhindered by distance, language, or time. And I think this is really what drove many of the original predictions that a networked world would be a utopian space, or at least a very positive space. Because if we can eliminate barriers to relationship development by connecting through a mediated environment, then we can truly then we can connect with the people that we have the most in common with, or that challenge us, or that have the same interests. And in doing so, how fast can we evolve and change and develop in positive ways? So the future will be shaped by those who understand how to support trust, empathy, responsibility, and privacy. Ever richer layers of social systems will support community building, political action, and commercial opportunities. We see that having happened over the last 50 years. I do believe that. But we are also missing some pieces that are foundational to having a shared community. Who do we trust? Who do we trust right this minute? Do we trust our governments, our political leaders, our one another? Do we trust our media? Celebrities? Who do we trust? Do we... If you say something, I will hear you or see you and call you out. Because I'm interested. I really, really want to know what people think about these topics. I spend a lot of time thinking about it and writing about it and talking about it because it's important. Because what we think today and what we're doing today, it has outsized effects. And I believe that here at 50 years on, we are at a pivot point, that we're at a crossroads with the web. And that today's leaders and individual users are going to have a major impact on who we are as humanity in not just 50 years, but 10 years, 100 years. Many saw as a positive potential of the web to provide power to those who may be traditionally without. So expanded internet access could lead to further disruption of existing social and political power structures, potentially reducing inequality and empowering individuals. And again, this is a strong throwback to some of our early predictions regarding the potential of networked communication and the internet to erase power lines built on accident of birth and to have a true meritocracy where the best ideas could float to the surface, where the most capable individuals, regardless of where they lived, what they do, how they were born, that won't have the same impact in their opportunities, that opportunities will be open. So how technology affects people in society depends in large part on what values we embed into their design and who controls them. With appropriate governance, information, communication, and AI, technologies can vastly increase human capability if we as a society establish the rights of users. So not just the potential to erase power differential, but also to empower users. Now let's move on to the not so positive, which interestingly, although more than 70% of respondents said that they believe things will be positive for the future, I had far more quotes to pull from and choose for the worrisome visions, because people often wrote at length about some potential negative connotations. And remember, this was distributed in 2018. So we were at a point where, summer 2018, so there was certainly a lot of news coverage at that time about some potentially worrisome activities happening in online spaces. The first theme here, and you'll see many of these mirror some of the positive themes, where some saw internet as potentially leading to, say, closing economic or social divides, and some saw it as potentially widening those divides. So in this, the divides between haves and have-nots will grow as a privileged few hoard the economic, health, and educational benefits of digital expansion. Who gets to participate in the great online experiment? Is it truly open to all? And will it grow, will it be more open, or will it condense? So there will be a loss of autonomy as humans integrate more with technology. Technology will increase existing inequalities. Most of the world's population is in low and middle income countries and already disadvantaged by it. They are likely to suffer technology colonialism. This was another very common concern, response, description, that the early ideals of a networked community bringing people together, leading to collaboration, are actually proving to increase inequality, and that the potential, particularly if we can determine what internet regulation may look like in the future, that may lead to increased inequality. Internet-enabled oppression. A powerful elite will control the internet and use it to monitor, important point, and manipulate, while providing entertainment that keeps the masses distracted and complacent. It's a new high-tech version of bread and circuses, okay? Imagine an artificially intelligent government programmed to rebalance humans and the natural world as painlessly as possible. We would enjoy an apparent wealth of choice, the illusion of liberty. And in reality, personal agency would be quite minimal, our desires redirected, and our behavior shaped by subtle, powerful nudges. It may be the only hope we have left. Really, I love that one. do the billions of websites that exist today actually lead to more choice? You all gonna go with like your mind's buzzing, I hope, after you leave this presentation? Connected and alone. The hyper-connected future will be populated by isolated users, unable to form and maintain unmediated human relationships. Yes, delves into some of what we were discussing earlier with why are we in this room? Why do we work together? Why do we collaborate on things that we want to accomplish? Why do we have friendships? Why do we have a generation where we are very concerned about the ability to shake hands and look people in the eye? There are some very interesting projections of what virtual reality may be and do and contribute to the sense of being connected but disconnected. So connected to maybe a virtual space that is individualized just for you with everything that you could want, but it's a construct and you're not existing in an actual space. It'll be interesting to see whether the internet and computers augment our intelligence and lives or whether they replace them. Surely many more things will be automated, which will mean that jobs will be lost and humans will be less involved in the daily performance of their lives. We will need a whole new social paradigm to deal with this. What is that social paradigm? And how far are we already into this world? How often do we, if you feel any sense of discomfort, do you turn to your phone or your screen or an ability to take yourself away from the discomfort that is inherent in interpersonal communication? The end of privacy. Personal privacy will be an archaic, outdated concept as humans willingly trade discretion for improved healthcare, entertainment opportunities, and promises of security. Are we at the point already where personal privacy no longer exists? And how much of that is our choice, and how much of that is imperative if we want to participate in the networked conversation? Historians will be harsh when they judge us relative to this one aspect. The harm to entire cultures that oppressive monitoring and surveillance can cause is frightening, and those future historians will be in a position to document that harm that people are actively inflicting today for all sorts of reasons. What is happening today in terms of monitoring and surveillance, and as our technology improves, which it almost certainly will, we have seen enormous leaps in not just the use of internet technology, but what it can do, in that technological advancement. How will that continue? Will it continue? Some actually predicted that we are at sort of a stagnation point in terms of technological advancements. But if that does continue at the enormous rate that it currently is, what does that mean to the ability to monitor and engage in surveillance? Facial recognition technology has come leaps and bounds just in the last 10 years. Where will it be 5 years, 10 years, 50 years from now? Digital life lays you bare, misallocated trust. This was another theme that was, although not specifically referenced as misallocated trust, was dominant throughout many of the responses we saw. It can inspire a loss of trust and often earns too much trust and regularly requires that you take the plunge, though you have absolutely no trust. Do you participate in a network like, I'm going to pick on Facebook a little bit because they've been in the news a lot regarding how much information they have and what they share and how they share that? Do you trust Facebook? And if you say no, do you still have to use Facebook? I'm from the United States. I live in North Carolina, and there are certain things that my son participates in a play The only way that I know what his rehearsal schedule is it's posted on Facebook. Okay? It's a group that other parents in the play developed. And there are workarounds potentially that I could probably figure out, but by far the easiest way to stay connected to that community is through a technology that I don't particularly support or want to have a lot of stuff to do with. So we may not trust, but we may have to still participate in these structures despite that lack of trust in a group. So assuming that the commercial impetus remains dominant, that international regulation remains weak, and that people remain willing to give away their data for access to the internet and apps, then I foresee a dysfunctional future where data valence reigns supreme, and where privacy and associated freedoms has become a distant memory. Will we lead to a society that you can't participate in unless you're connected? And if so, are we going to be forced to put our trust in networks connections? Or are we going to participate in networks connections that we don't trust and that we don't support? And the very last theme that I'm going to talk about is the idea that there is no planet B. That the future of humanity is inextricably connected to the future of the natural world, and we aren't recognizing that. Without drastic measures to reduce environmental degradation, the very existence of human life in 50 years is in question. We got a number of responses that were essentially, none of this matters because we will not be here in 50 years. On a more nuanced level, slightly more positive, maybe we can, I'm hoping we'll leave with some positive responses or maybe some positive communication. It may not be that all of human life is wiped out, but rather that we're presuming that the next 50 years will have the same expansion of network technology and the same access that we have today. But in fact, have we overgrown to the point where our world, our natural world, can no longer support the systems that we've developed, and therefore perhaps we won't have the extension. So innovations will mean little. Favorite quote to end on. Innovations will mean little if the algorithms and technology used to develop them are not applied with the same attention to human consequences as they are to innovation. Okay? We have been very focused on what's next, what's new, what can we do with this technology, and maybe less so on the questions of what should we do with this technology. Oh, yes, you're behind the big light, yes.
Hello. Okay, I have a question. I just noticed, like, all the positive visions, probably 95% were white men. And in your negative visions, it was mostly women, some of whom were women of color, but not many, and 1 or 2 men. Was that deliberate? Because, you know, I think that there's something quite important being said there. And I'm wondering if that was a deliberate move on your part to pull quotes according to that bias.
I would say it is not deliberate in the sense of pulling quotes for this presentation specifically. However, some of the richest and most thoughtful responses regarding looking at potential negatives for 50 years in the future did come from women, participants of color, people of color. Part of why I include a Share Your Vision slide is I would very much like to extend who we are including in these reports. I'd like to collect business cards. I'd like to know your names. I'd like you to sign up and say, I also want to share my voice. Okay? We started this project, and when I say we, I'm a fairly new addition to this project. Shanna Anderson and Lee Rainey have been spearheading it for 20 years, and we use the same distribution list that we started 20 years ago and have been adding and adding and adding and adding to it. And the community that is actively involved in regulation and development and expansion of the web or of the internet has grown exponentially. And we would like to have a more diverse voice shown in some of our, we would like to have more voices and more diverse voices that are presented and shared in these reports. I also recognize through doing much of this research that communities that see, I think I said at the start of this talk that 50 years, people often looked backwards in order to make predictions for the future. It does not surprise me in the least that the people who have not benefited to the same extent potentially are the ones who don't necessarily see a rosy, glowy future and maybe have some more insight into that. Does that help answer your question? Yeah. For the Share Your Vision, well, for this slide, I'm absolutely serious. I would like to include people on the distribution list. We do this every year. It usually comes out in about July. I would like you to consider, and I should have meant to bring paper, but because I don't know, do we carry business cards anymore? No? My students told me, we have a couple in the room, that one of the things they found is that nobody's carrying their business cards, so it's hard to get contact information. I have mine, so please, you are welcome to pick one up and contact me that way. I'm happy to share links to the full report. I'm happy to just talk to you in more detail, especially if you just want to have these like long conversations about what is happening right now, because it's very interesting, I think. And if maybe I can get just a piece of paper, and people might be willing to put their name and email address, I'd love to be able to contact you for future surveys, because if you're in this room, you're someone who's thinking about what is happening with the web, what is happening with the internet, and where are we going in the future. Another way to participate is we have Elon University students have been attending events across the globe to reach out to people and ask them for their feedback, their thoughts, and do short video interviews. Do we have, I don't see the students still in this room. Do we have them still here? They were here at the start. I think they may have, they may be out interviewing people. But if you see young people with video cameras doing on-the-spot interviews, they're looking for participants, and they would be very interested in talking to you about what your visions for the future of networked technology might be. And we have about 30 minutes, I believe. Does this session end at 3 o'clock? Yes? For questions, conversation, be interested to know, did any points really resonate with you? Yes, I have a point. Yes. And do we have a mic going around?
First of all, thank you very much for the interesting lecture you gave us. It was really, really amazing.
Thank you.
God bless you. Second thing, since I am raising 4 children and everybody, 4 of them, they are addicted to technology and isolated from me and from the father because they have their own world. Even the youngest one, he doesn't want to go anywhere, even to the supermarket where the one we used to be, it's a pleasure for them. So at the end, while you are speaking, I said, what will be expectation after 50 years? All the things I got is the need. What do you need the technology for? You said it will make our life easier. From my point of view, it's make it more miserable, actually. We are not contacting anymore. We are isolated more and more and more, and depending on our phones for the happiness and even for the emotions. If I got any fight with my husband, I have this Facebook. I can go and find another person, which is a disaster. Always when I go to ITU, we see the nature of African people. They still have their nature without technology. They have their farms, they have their animals, they have their rivers. I said, what will technology will give them? It will make them more gathering group with a sophisticated brain thinking, but without result. So we are transferring people from their small community as small families and society to an isolated person. This is my point of view. You said maybe it's our life become easier, faster, we can live more. But at the end, where is the happiness of it? Where is the beauty of it? This is the question I don't want to imagine after 50 years because I will not be here, but at least give it to me now. For my children, within 20 years, how we can deal with this very fast technology. Thank you very much.
That's an interesting question. Could you disconnect today?
Me?
Yes. Is technology a choice?
No, unfortunately.
Right.
Especially if they are now starting, send your homework, send your project with the email, we cannot disconnect.
Difficult to participate economically, difficult to participate through school systems without being connected.
Yes.
Absolutely. So what do we do about it? How do we? I have 3 children. They're quite young and they are very technology savvy, and I 100% agree that I feel isolated from them and from our relationship through when we are using technology.
When before he sleep, he said, Mama, can you get me powerful? Okay, this powerful, where it will get you? You will vanish and then be disappeared, and this is your powerful things. You are a human being with a feeling, emotion, tears, sadness, happiness. We have to go through all this cycle, not only to be separated with this small icon of iPhone or laptop, and then to be isolated from all the world because I am sophisticated and I know everything. Mm-hmm. We are raising children not to be 5 years old and 6 years old. Unfortunately, the channels are open. They are living the teenage, the one who's living 5 years old, he's becoming as a 15 years old. What's so special about getting family? Why we married? Because everything is there for him. There is no, you know what I mean, anxious to know what will happen when I am 15, what will happen when I am 25, what will be my dreams. Everything is there, he can manage it. So this is the other point also.
The very first report that was published, one of the questions was looking specifically at Google. And what does Google, somehow it was framed, I can't remember exactly how, but it was essentially the question, is Google making us stupid? We remember this was 2004. This was a pretty common question, thought, concern. And what that meant was if we have ready access to facts, to information at our fingertips, what do we need our brains for? Okay. Yeah. For critical thinking, I heard. Okay. So what is that different than what Google search results can provide? Is Google thinking for us? When we put in a random question that's not exactly what we really want, but it figures it out for us? See a response up front. And these are meant to incite response, certainly not to imply my own sense.
I think that technology in the internet is supposed to enhance human capability. I really don't want to have to remember my mother's birthday because I trust that technology is going to remind me 1 week, and then I go out and get the gift, perfect gift for her. So when it comes back to, is Google making us stupid? I think Google, the results you get from Google, at least now, in the next 10 years, those are low-level intellectual problems. But because if they become dependable enough, it should enable human beings to become good at second-order logical problems. And I think that the people that will capture the benefits for the next 50 years are the people who are deliberate about understanding that this thing is going to happen. How do I use it? How do I not be a victim of it? How do I benefit from it? Whether it's having the discipline to make your child understand you need to cut off from this computer for 2 days a week. Because if you just give in to, oh, I need to be connected and all of that, then we are giving some of the responsibility we have as human beings to determine the path we take in the future. So it's really up to us.
It goes back to some of the responses, considering that our social paradigms may change, that what's important, the skills that are important to have, maybe relate to self-regulation, to choosing interpersonal over comfortable. Because other people are inherently uncomfortable. I don't know what you're going to respond. And if I don't like it, I can't just close your webpage. Comment.
Yeah, interesting. And the internet is going to break the restriction of geography, restriction of language, and restriction of culture as well. And on the other side of the story, that means we're gonna lose huge diversities of our world. And as the previous guys also said, there won't be the variety of solution for one problem, which exists now, but there won't be. So I think your entire presentation was not focused much on that part of the story. Otherwise, it was excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. To try to see if I fully understand you, that rather than leading to a better understanding of diversity of thought, of diversity of experiences, that we will instead see, it's not a global community in the sense that that it celebrates the differences of those who participate, but rather that it may lead to conformity. I've been talking quite a bit. And perhaps dampen some of the richness that not having a fully connected global community provides. Because we thrive in community, in pockets, in shared community. What happens when there's just one community? If that's the case. Is that getting at what you're considering? Somewhat. I'm interested, one of the real dichotomous points, and I do think that the perspective of those who answered the question really played in much to this. Will the internet in the next 50 years lead to greater economic divide, less an economic divide? Thoughts on that?
Thank you for these mind-boggling insights. My concern is that we don't seem to be knowing how to balance between development in technology, which gives us commercial and related advantages, with the degradation of the environment. And we all know clearly, without taking care of the world, you'll be destroying it. My question is, who is going to do this balance?
That is a question for, I would say, the group, in that my role in producing this work is to try to illuminate the variety of opinions that come through when we ask a very broad question, like, what will happen in 50 years? And the difficult questions, what do we do about it? Who should make those decisions? How should they be driven? Should it be driven by money or power or a concern for human existence? those I don't know that anyone has answers to. Part of why, even though the vast majority of respondents said positive, but many of the comments pointed out negative things, is I think we can see a lot of problems today. I think we can see that there are a lot of ways that the internet is hurting interpersonal relationships, is leading to greater economic divide. Something needs to be done about it. It's part of why I feel very lucky to be here at this conference this year. This is my first time, and this is the first time I've been the lead author on one of these reports. And it's a very important time to do that and be here, because I hope that in coming together face to face from all over the world, we're able to have some of these big discussions about what can be done. I can point out lots of problems, lots of possibilities. Now we need to decide, what do we do with all this? Thank you for your comment. That was very interesting.
Thank you very much for the informative presentation. My question is, you did introduce yourself as a university don, meaning much of what you are presenting now is out of research work across maybe continents or countries. And I was just wondering, giving an example specifically of youth who are highly addicted to internet today, which among the continents, maybe countries, they are developed countries, developing, and the third world, which youth among these countries are able to effectively cope up with the challenges of internet, and why? For instance, if I went to United States, I get a youth of, let's say 20 years, and maybe I go to Senegal in Africa, I get a youth of, let's say, again, 20 years. Or both of them being presented the same problems of internet. Which youth is more prepared to cope up with the challenges of internet, and why?
I have never been asked that question. It's interesting. This is a personal response, okay? And my personal belief is that the internet is a human construction, and therefore, the positives and negatives related to online experience stem from people, okay? I think we kind of think of AI, or we think of the algorithms as existing in some way beyond humanity or different than humanity. But I don't believe that there is a single nation or a single leader that is best positioned to address problems, potential, future, because leaders are leaders of humans, okay? And we have but we have a shared understanding of our communities, our constituents, the people whom we may represent as leaders. And therefore, if we see the problems and the issues related to internet as actually being human issues, then all voices need to be heard in that, because we are all human and we are all stem from different areas, different places, different communities. So I can't say this one group should be the leader, this should be the person leading this charge, because I think that would be faulty. Yes? I can take this one. We probably have this question, maybe one more.
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Airana. I represent the NetMission.Asia organization based in Hong Kong. Maybe it's a very kind of strange question to ask, but So I don't really see, maybe, I'm not saying that you don't have it, but I don't really see what is the real value of your research, because what you're researching is how people are imagining the future of internet, and this is just like a collection of different predictions of different people, and you group them as like positive and negative ones, but what is the actual like value that you want to derive from these predictions? Because this is, for me, it's just looks like a collection, and so you're saying like we can address certain problems, but what are the problems? Because when we look at the negative predictions, of course, there are like a lot of problems, but then we look at positive ones, seems like no problem at all. And how are you choosing what problems to address? And most of the problems that they are predicting are actually happening now. You said it like a couple of times before that this is already happening. And why don't we instead focus on the current issues that we are facing in the internet? And while we're fixing those problems, I'm sure that these predictions can change dramatically. And even those people, when they gave you when they filled the surveys, maybe the next day they already had different predictions, because this is the world of internet, which changes a lot, and like you cannot really predict it. I mean, like it's very random thing. And so what I want to ask is, how do you, can you somehow solidify the value of your research? Yeah.
Yes, thank you for that question. Yes, the value that I see. I believe there's value in record keeping. Okay? And ultimately, this work it's a record. We publish there's some slight editing for grammar, a little bit for a lot of our respondents, and sometimes responses are in different languages, so there's some editing that goes on in translation. But largely, it's direct printing of full quotes, okay? Which this is the only report, the only research that I do that is done in this way, and I actually see it as more a curation and a historical record than necessarily other research that I do and work on relates to maybe a specific issue or a recommendation. I'm doing a project now looking at communication in online communities related to anti-vaccination rhetoric, conversations about how people use data to support alternative views related to vaccination. And that's a very applied type of research where the end finding is this is how we can better communicate and lead to better statistical literacy, really among general populations, and why that's important. This is about as unapplied as I get, and it's not, as much as possible, I try to keep my own views out of the analysis of this work and print full quotations, because having a record of what do people believe today, and what did they believe last year, and what did they believe 20 years ago, I do see a value to that. We're actually in the process right now of archiving all of the reports. They're currently archived online, but to archive every piece of information we have related to the future of the internet work so that it's accessible to researchers, to individuals across the globe. So if people do want to understand how has our vision changed in 20 years, actually we go back to the mid-90s, early 90s, that'll be there. Because we can't ever, you made a great point that somebody's ideas today might change tomorrow. Absolutely right. I want a record of what we believe today, or what people are saying today. And I also want to mention in qualitative work, there's not an attempt to be generalizable. So the quotes that are published here are only representing the individuals who are quoted at this point in time. So it's not meant to be generalizable to the full population of any particular country or the world. But that's where I see the value, is having and maintaining and building a historical record for this concept that goes so quickly and changes so quickly. And it's fascinating to look back right now, 20 years ago, to see what did people think about these same questions 20 years ago. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Margarita. To all the questions that you've asked, whether we think the internet will be positive or negative, my answer was always if. Because it all comes back to people, I believe. What are we going to do with the internet? How do we address? And also to address your question about parents, I work in education and with parents a lot, and to adults in general. We've never had to deal with the internet. We've never had to deal with the discipline and responsibility, accountability that comes with the internet. So to give you a few examples, a lot of teachers complain that parents give devices to students all the time, right? That's one. On the other hand, a lot of parents complain that schools don't educate kids in the proper way, not to use devices. And the question of accessibility also of internet, does it make inequality gap bigger or smaller? Actually right now I'm leading a course on the global competence, and we have a student from Uganda, and she's on a scholarship, and her issue is no Wi-Fi. So they're using data internet, and the connection is not good. So sometimes she can connect, sometimes she cannot. But at the same time, she's joining global students to discuss issues that exist in the world based on SDGs. So in the end of the day, maybe it's one student, but she will be able to make a difference and bring it further. And getting back to the question of also how are we connected in the world of the internet and online conferences, why I'm here today, for example. I spent the last 8 years in China, and I wouldn't be able to come here just a month ago. I've just moved here, and I can. But if I wouldn't be able, I would join the internet conference. And it would be almost the same for me because I can connect with people. And at this very time, I'm also at another conference, virtually. And people just look at the profiles and they scan quickly. So we get back to critical thinking, to fast thinking as well. And they identify people they can collaborate with. So I already have some collaborations from that webinar based internet conference. So all that put together, if we find the right approach as parents, as people, as educators, as policymakers, decision makers, and take responsibility for what is actually going to happen, I believe that the answers will be positive. If we don't, then it's also on us. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. We force a dichotomy in this, and then we allow people to, and then we ask people to explain in more detail, but we force that question. We force the dichotomy of better or worse. In past reports, we've forced things like, will health improve? Will AI lead to positive advancements or negative? And we understand that that many questions can't be answered through a forced dichotomy. And therein is the value of this fairly unique, not unique, but say not particularly common type of research where, yes, often the value of it is in question, and it's extensive, it's a lot of work, it's time, it's the people who, the participants spend a great deal of time crafting comments and responses. But I do believe that the value there is in forcing one first to say yes, no, positive, negative, and then allowing that thought to be shared in more detail. Interestingly, looking back over some past predictions, because we asked 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, we asked what do you think will be the case in 10 years? So we have some interesting predictions about 2020 that we're looking at now. One prediction was that universities will no longer exist. Okay. Why would you go to Elon University in North Carolina when you can go to MIT online and you can watch open lectures from anywhere in the world? I live in a country where higher education is extraordinarily expensive. Why do you spend that money when you can engage in massive online courses and get a degree that way? So 10 years ago, we said, university's not going to exist. Now, this was predictions from 10 years ago that were about 2020, and we are not there. Also, that we will have one world, one language. This is, you have to look back about 20 years to see this. This was shortly before, well, let's see if you can guess why. It was strong, certain people had some very strong beliefs that we will no longer have disparate languages. Everyone will speak one language, and there was discussion about what that language might be, but one language. What do you think many will point to and say, this is the reason that we have multiple languages still, that we haven't sort of coalesced into a single language? Well, people, culture. When we have some, we'll say tech visionaries who are very tech-minded, but many would point to and say, Google Translate. That's why we have multiple languages, because now we can all communicate together. We just use Google Translate to translate all of our web pages or all of our content. There was an attempt for Esperanto, never worked out. Didn't, yep. I suppose one might say maybe we'll lead to that our one language will actually be ones and zeros, maybe. We need to wrap up so that we can leave the room for the next presentation, but probably time for one more comment, thought, belief they'd like to share. Thank you all for your time, and thank you for your comments and your participation and for listening. And please take a moment to, nope, they changed it. If you can read the full report, it's far more in-depth and has much more insight than I can do in a short presentation. It's easier just to Google Future of the Internet reports. They're all over the place. It's a lot easier than that. I tried to make a QR code, but I couldn't get couldn't get to the internet in order to, at the internet conference, couldn't access the internet, so I couldn't make you a scannable code. Also, I'll leave some business cards at the table, so if you'd like to on your way out, I really would love to have greater participation and to connect in the future. Thank you.